At the beginning of round 3 in the DigiStrat simulation, you'll experience a spectrum auction. The federal government sells the rights to transmit over specific bands of the electromagnetic spectrum. So the federal government is providing this resource of spectrum that you and your competitors can purchase in order to provide 5G spectrum. 5G spectrum is a limited and scarce resource. There's only so much spectrum available and it can't be created. It's a physical limitation to the amount of spectrum that's available. The goal of the auction is so that resources are allocated efficiently to organizations that value them most, and that's going to be determined by how much they pay. And the other goal of the auction is to maximize the revenue that the government receives from the auction. So it's built to, like most auctions, to maximize the revenue for the organization that is selling, in this case, the spectrum, which is the federal government. This type of auction that we're running is an unusual auction. It's called a simultaneous multiple round auction, or SMRA. And this is the style of auction that is used commonly for auctioning spectrum from governments around the world. And the way it works is there are groups of licenses that are auctioned simultaneously. So it's not just a single license, but multiple licenses that are sold simultaneously. And it's also not just a single round of bidding, but multiple rounds of bidding. There will be multiple opportunities to bid. So you and your competitors will simultaneously make sealed bids for any licenses you'd like to buy. And when the bidding for a round has concluded, the round results will be posted. You'll see the identities of the organizations that bid, and you'll also see what bids they made, how much spectrum they're trying to buy, and what they were willing to pay for it. And you'll also see who has, of course, the current standing high bid and who was that bidder for the current standing high bid. But the auction doesn't end there. Rounds will continue until the bids for spectrum are equal to or less than the licenses available. So this is complicated because there's multiple licenses available and everybody's bidding on a large set of licenses. It's not like one thing that you're buying, but it's multiple things you're buying simultaneously. So let's go through some of the auction rules. The auction rules are that at the beginning of each auction, you'll set the number of licenses you'd like to purchase. And there's a limited number of licenses that will be available, and you can purchase some set of the limited number of licenses. You'll also set the price per license that you're bidding on. So the price will be the same for all the licenses you're buying. Let's say you might want to buy, say, 5 licenses. You can pay $20 million per license. That's going to cost you $100 million if you put it together. At the end of each round, you'll see the identities of the bids and bidders for spectrum, so your other competitors, who has the current high bid, and the bids that would have received spectrum if the auction would have concluded. But normally, the auction won't conclude for a single round. Usually a new round will begin. And in that new round, there'll be a new minimum price that will be based on the prices from the previous round. So there'll be a new sort of minimum level of price that you can pay for at this next round. And the auction continues until the bids are less than or equal to the number of licenses available. So if there are 12 licenses available and people are bidding for 20, the round will continue. And the rounds won't stop until there are 12 or fewer licenses being bid on, or 10 rounds. So this auction, unlike the real federal spectrum auction, concludes after 10 rounds, whereas the federal spectrum auction can continue beyond that. At the end of the auction, the highest bids that efficiently purchase all spectrum are the winners. So what that means also is that the federal government, the organization that is auctioning the spectrum, can look back to previous rounds and sell at those prices if they want to. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the final round is provides the winners. They might be looking back to usually the round before that to conclude who the winner is for the entire spectrum. So it might not happen in the final round. Some key points. In this auction, you cannot increase the number of licenses that you bid on in future rounds. So if you bid on 5 licenses in a round, the next round you can't bid on 6 or 10. You can only bid on 5 or fewer licenses in subsequent rounds. A timer is used for each round. The first round, to give you and your team time to figure out how this all works and to determine the number of licenses and the price that you want to pay, you're going to have 15 minutes. But subsequent rounds are only going to last 3 minutes. So the subsequent rounds are much faster than the first round. If you do not bid or you skip the auction, you have to submit the bid. You have to press the submit button. And if you don't press the submit button or you press, I want to skip this auction, that means you and your team will not receive spectrum. So if you bid 0, then there's no way to increase that number from 0 to something higher in the subsequent rounds. You cannot rejoin the auction, even if you make a mistake. This auction is like the real world, is if there's a mistake, you just can't take it back. You're just going to keep moving on. Again, spectrum is limited, and it's unlikely that every team is going to get spectrum. There's going to be some teams that want it that won't receive it, and that's the way it will work out because this is a limited resource. But also, it's true that teams that maximize their value at the end aren't necessarily the teams that secure 5G spectrum during the auction. Some teams that have been successful in having the highest stock value in previous runs of this have not received or secured 5G spectrum during the auction. So it's not enough also to purchase 5G spectrum. After the auction is over, you also need to invest in 5G infrastructure. What I'm going to do now is show you a sample or a demo of how the spectrum auction works, and I'll also show you the 5G infrastructure investment at the end of that. All right, so we're going to begin here with 4 teams, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta, and they're going to start the 5G spectrum auction. As the facilitator, I'm starting it. And if I go to Team 1, what you'll see here is the beginning of the spectrum auction. So the auction's beginning and a countdown of a few seconds, and this will be the first round. In this auction, there are 12 licenses available. The number for your group might be different than 12. Now we have 15 minutes to make our decision. You can see the minimum bid for this round is 20 million, and I can place a bid per license. It's going to be the same bid for all the licenses that I purchase for this. I'm going to start this is Alpha team here. I'm going to bid 20 million, and I'm going to try to purchase 10 licenses. Notice I'm limited in this case to purchase up to 10 and no more than 10. And then in subsequent rounds, I can't bid more than this. So I'm going to go ahead and bid 10 here. So 20 times 10 is going to equal the total bid value of 200 million. So I'm going to spend up, if I were to win here, I would spend up to $200 million on these 10 licenses if I were to get it. So I'm going to go ahead and submit my bid. So the Alpha team has now submitted its bid, and it's ready, and it's waiting for the other teams. These are sealed bid auctions again, so we're not going to get to see what the other teams are doing until everyone has submitted. Now I'm moving on to Beta team. Here's Beta team. The auction is continuing. The countdown timer is lower. In this case, I'm going to bid more. So Beta team is going to bid 25 million, and they're going to try to buy 6 licenses. So 25 times 6 is $150 million. Beta team is submitting their bid. And they're waiting on the other 2 teams. Now we're going to move on to Delta team, or Gamma team, pardon me. Gamma team. All right, so Gamma team is going to pay a bit more. They're going to bid 30 million, and they're going to try to buy, let's say, 4 licenses. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and submit a bid for the Gamma team for 4 licenses. And finally, Delta team is going to come in at, let's say, 27. They're going to bid on, let's say, 4 licenses as well. And 27 times 4 is 108 million. Okay, so now all 4 have submitted, and we're advancing to the next round, even though the timer's not stopped yet. So we're moving on because all 4 have advanced, and we see the results of the auction down here. What you can see here is that Gamma team won the auction in terms of paying the most, and they received all 4 of the license. If the auction were to end at this point, um, they would have received all 4 of the licenses they wanted. So they're in green because they're kind of in the money. That's how we're referring to them. Delta team also bid for 4, and they were willing to, they were the next highest bidder at 27. So they also would have received all 4 licenses if the auction were to stop at this point, which it's not. The reason that it's not stopping is that 24 licenses are desired, but only 12 licenses are available. So it's going to continue on. Beta team would have received some additional licenses. They wanted 6, but only 4 more are remaining because the first 8 are taken by these 2. So they're in yellow because 4 out of the 6 would have been allocated to them, and Alpha would have received none because they bid too low, even though they wanted 10. These other 3 teams would have received those licenses if they had gone through at this point. So let's go through again and do a subsequent round of bidding. Okay, we have 2 minutes left, and now the new minimum bid is 22 million. So we can put a price in of 22 if we want to. In this case, I'm going to put in $35 for these licenses for the Alpha team. I'm going to go ahead and submit. I'm going to stay at the 10 that I had put in here before. So Alpha team now is bidding 35 times 10 or $350 million. They've submitted their bid. They're waiting for the other teams. We're moving on to Beta team. Beta team, now notice they cannot submit more than 6 bids. That's the maximum that they're allowed to do so because in the previous round they submitted 6. Last time they bid 25. This time I'm going to have them bid 32. So they're going to go in for 32. You have to wait until the calculation is done, and they're submitting their bid. I'm going to move on now to Gamma team. Gamma team last time bid 30. They wanted 4. They can't choose more than 4 in this round. In this case, I'm going to have them do 31, and we're going to have them submit the bid for 4. And finally, Delta team here, they are in at 27 for 4. They can't do more than that. What I'm going to do for this one is hit skip auction. What that means is that Delta team now will no longer be able to bid, and they're not going to get any 5G spectrum. So if you skip the auction or you don't press submit in the time that the countdown is for, if you just enter these numbers but never hit submit, you're going to receive 0 licenses. Or I guess the other option is if you set this to 0, it'd be the same thing here. So if we did this as well, we would have that happen here. So let me go ahead and hit skip auction. We can do this in time here. And I'm going to go ahead and submit with the skipping of the auction here for Delta team. And it said, you did not place a bid. It actually didn't even get in on time there, so the timer can run out as well. So Delta team now has received 0, and they're never going to get 5G spectrum. In this case, Alpha team would have received 10 licenses because they were the high bidder, even though they were the low bidder in the previous round. Beta team, because they were the second highest, would have received 2 out of the 6 because there's 12 available in total. And Gamma would have received nothing because they were out of the money in this case. Now we're on to auction to round 3. So I'm going to go back up here. And in this case, I'm going to bid 42 for the Alpha team. And I'm going to cut my licenses down to 6 and submit my bid. So it's 42 times 6, which equals 252. So I'm submitting my bid for round 3 for Alpha team. So they're ready to go. Moving on to Beta team, I'm going to have them ask for 4 licenses, and they're going to go to, let's say, 40. So 40 times 4, or 160. Submit the bid. And now the last team is the Gamma team because Delta team is out. Delta team can no longer participate because they, the auction ended. So for Delta team here, let's see, I think I put 6 and 4 in. So I want to wrap up the auction now. I'm going to put in 2, and I'm going to put the price in at, I'm just going to keep it at 39 as the minimum bid. So we're going to calculate this through for 39 times 2 is equal to 78. And this will conclude the auction in this case because the number of licenses that are being bid on is identical to the number of licenses that are available. So let's watch the end of the auction now as the remaining team, Gamma team, submits the final bid. Okay, so the auction concluded, and we can see who got which licenses here and how much they paid for it. So Alpha team paid 42 million for its 6 licenses and got 262. Beta team uh, bid 40 for its 4 licenses and paid 160. And Gamma bid 39 for 2 licenses and received 28. Delta received no licenses. And that's the conclusion of the auction in this case. And again, the reason this auction ended is because the number of licenses that were bid on was equal to the number of licenses that were available. And it could also end if there were fewer licenses bid on than were available. And if that's the case, the auction would look back to the previous rounds to calculate who received the additional spectrum. So just to wrap up, I want to review the key points with you, just now that you've seen the auction and how it plays. Again, you cannot increase the number of licenses you bid on in future rounds. You can only bid on the same number of licenses or a smaller number of licenses in future rounds. Again, there's a timer for each round, and it's pretty quick. The first round is 15 minutes. Subsequent rounds are 3 minutes. If you do not bid or you skip an auction, you won't receive any spectrum. So you cannot rejoin the auction even if you make a mistake. Again, the spectrum is limited, and so it's unlikely that every team is going to get spectrum. When you do get spectrum, well, if you maximize your value if you're trying to maximize your value, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get 5G. There are teams that are successful that don't get 5G spectrum. And finally, it's not enough to purchase 5G spectrum after the auction is over. You also need to invest in 5G infrastructure. So let's take a look at that last bit for our wrap up here. So now we're in year 3, the auction is over, and we're back to making our normal decisions in the simulation. The decisions are all the same as they were before, except that we have this new item that didn't appear before called 5G cell towers and network equipment. So in order to take advantage of the 5G spectrum that we purchased, we need to spend some money on 5G cell towers and network equipment for this round. So that will align with the 5G spectrum that we received in order to use it and provide it to our customers.